The savings that I had were eroding very, very quickly. And over a period of 2 years, I reached a point where my company was not making any more money. My name is Ratigan. I set up a company called IC2 Group through Venture Haven about 5-6 years ago. I was living in Malaysia for about 6 years prior to moving to Singapore. I was working as an employee for quite a few years. In Singapore, to get employment passes renewed, it's not necessarily very easy, and there's got to be a certain threshold in terms of salaries. And after so many years in the corporate world, I decided, well, you know what, if it's going to be this way, I'm just going to start my own company and take the risk. The company is IC2 Group. We're a consultancy. Initially, I set it up with a view of helping companies that wanted to come into Singapore from overseas that didn't necessarily have the know-how, the understanding as to how to operate within Asia, number one. Number two, didn't necessarily want to spend the money on investing or office space. So it was mainly eyes and ears on the ground for these companies. I worked with a few companies here and everything kind of expanded from there. I started the business, as I mentioned earlier, because I was investing a lot of time and effort in a corporate environment where a lot of the time you might not necessarily be valued. Middle management has a tendency in kind of stopping anyone that has potential to grow further. And I just felt that I'd reached a point in the corporate world where, well, if I was going to invest that amount of time, I'd be better off, number one, going it alone. Singapore also, employment passes through corporate getting a little bit harder to get. So I think Singapore was quite good in as much as they saw potential for entrepreneurs to kind of set up their own companies. So that's why I thought, well, if I'm going to put all my effort, I might as well just put it in a business that I'm quite passionate about. The proudest one really was when my first client paid me my first paycheck. When you work as an employee, you rely every month on a salary that comes in. Whether or not you've performed, whether or not you haven't performed, you've got that stability. So there's a lot of safety, a lot of risk involved, obviously, in setting up your own company as an entrepreneur. When somebody decided, well, we're going to work with this company, and my first invoice was settled, I would say that was probably the proudest moment of my career as an entrepreneur. Stability in regular income, safety net with medical insurance, and holidays paid for after a certain amount of time working. I had to give that up. It's not necessarily something that a lot of people want to give up. I mean, I've worked for myself in the past, and I think I always like the freedom, the independence, safety versus risk and independence, weighing up the pros and cons, and I reached a conclusion that for me, it made more sense to work it alone. The toughest point for any business recently has been COVID. So I set up my company as a consultancy to help other organizations either expand, either come into Asia via Singapore. Growth occurred quite quickly in the early stages. Then things kind of went quiet and COVID hit literally just at that point. So everything came to a virtual grinding halt. The savings that I had were eroding very, very quickly. And over a period of 2 years, I reached a point where my company was not making any more money. Because I'm the director of my own company, my employment pass was expiring November of 2021. I reapplied for my employment pass and I spent 4 months countering rejections. So a pretty tough time. Emotionally, it was very draining. I mean, to say that a lack of sleep was not something that was happening would probably be incorrect. You know, bittersweet. You've been here nearly 10 years and you find that at the end of the day, well, either stay in Singapore or make more money or leave. If you're passionate about something, go for it. A lot of people are quite scared of leaving the safety net of employment. They might have commitments, married with children, mortgages, and things like those. So obviously these are things that no doubt people will take into consideration. But if you're quite young, you've got a lot of energy, you're passionate about what you do, I would always say, even if at some point in your life you find that, okay, well, you set up your own company, it worked for a few years, but then you realize, well, it hasn't necessarily been as good as you may have thought it would. Nothing stops you going back into employment. And there are companies out there that will obviously value what you've had to learn as an entrepreneur. So initially taking the step and jumping into the void is the biggest and the most daunting thing to do. It's really following what you want to do. So for me, is if it's something that you feel, I actually feel that I could do quite well, I'm independent and I'm willing to work quite hard, and I'm passionate about this, and you're working in environments where maybe people don't necessarily value, your work ethic, what you put in, also your view on things, your outlook on life, get out there and just try. And Singapore is actually quite easy to set up companies. Venture Haven was very helpful with me, quite supportive every year when I'm doing my books, what you want to do. So yeah, give it a go.